My name is Victoria Kelly, and I will be discussing the controversy of labeling of GMO foods. This graphic displays both positions in regard to the controversial issue of GMO labeling. Many are in support, and many are against the labeling. There are many different issues and viewpoints regarding GMOs. To begin, the health issues. Consumers of different food products want and need to be informed of what they are ingesting. Consumers must be made aware of genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, or genetically engineered GE food sources. Information must be provided so consumers can make conscious, educated decisions on which products to buy. Having education on why GMOs are good or why they may be perceived as bad will give the consumers the ability to make their own choice in regard to food purchases. The FDA requires that many consumers are invested in whether food ingredients are derived from genetically engineered plants and has issued guidance for manufacturers who wish to voluntarily label their foods as containing or not containing such ingredients. If a manufacturer wishes to label their food as not being produced using genetic engineering, it is recommended that they use the terms such as not genetically engineered, not bioengineered, or not genetically modified through the use of modern biotechnology. These sayings have been approved for manufacturers to use on their labels and promotions of their products. Foods derived from genetically engineered plants must meet the same safety, labeling, and other regulatory requirements that apply to all foods regulated by the FDA. The FDA has required additional labeling of foods derived from genetically engineered source where it found that compositional differences resulted in material changes. The FDA has required additional labeling of foods derived from genetically engineered source where it found that the compositional differences and the material changes were substantial. For example, when the FDA learned during a consultation that a new canola oil had increased lauric acid content compared to the conventional canola oil, it was required that the oil be labeled as such, having written on it lauric acid canola or laurate canola oil. That way consumers will know that there's a difference compared to the conventionally produced canola oil. Similarly, soybean oil containing higher levels of oleic acid than conventional soybean oil must be labeled as such, either high in oleic soybean oil or contains oleic soybean oil. Also, soybean oil containing significant levels of stearidonic acid, which is not typically found in soybean oil, must be labeled as such. Because of these differences and the compositional changes that are not found in the typical farm-grown oils, it must be labeled as such so consumers are aware when they're purchasing. What is a GMO or GE food? It is defined by the FDA that the genetic material of food has been altered in a way that does not occur naturally, allowing selected individual genes to be transformed or transferred from one organism to another. Genetically modifying food began around 1996, and by 2012, 88 to 96% of corn, cotton, and soybeans grown in the U.S. are results of GMOs. There is a scientific viewpoint regarding GMO and GMO labeling. The scientific viewpoint is that GMOs are not harmful to consume by the human population. There exists a scientific consensus that genetically modified foods are safe for human consumption. Potential benefits of genetically modified crops include development of disease and drought-resistant crops, decreased use of pesticides, more nutritious and tastier food, and food with longer shelf life. The benefits of GMO products are important in highly developed countries like the United States. But more importantly, they are necessary in lower income countries or third world countries whose populations experience food insecurity, sometimes famine. It can be a matter of life or death. To summarize the scientific viewpoint, it is safe to ingest, and there is no scientific research that supports harmful effects on the body or its system. There exists a scientific consensus that genetically modified foods are safe for human consumption. Potential for development of different produce and animals being resistant against disease and drought. Decreased need for pesticides and food with longer shelf life. There also exists the public's viewpoint on the issues of GMO and GMO labeling, known as complete transparency, or the right to know. Some consumer groups, such as the Center for Food Safety, argue that individuals have the right to know what is in their food and how it was produced, pointing to overwhelming public support of this stance. The public consumers themselves at large agreed with the Center for Food Safety's view that there should be full disclosure on the labels. The Center for Food Safety drafted a petition to have full disclosure of GMO and GE foods to be put on the labels. Many feel as though there are not nutritional health benefits to GMOs, which is why many choose to avoid foods that have been modified and only purchase naturally grown or organic produce and meat. However, genetically modifying foods can in fact increase the nutritional value of the food without creating harm to those consuming. This disconnect behind the research on GMOs is a result of why many people of the public are not in support of GMOs. There is also a clinical viewpoint, which is that scientists and researchers are in support of GMOs. Consumer knowledge about GMOs has not increased at the same rate as the adoption of GMOs crops. Consumers worldwide are displaying limited understanding, misconceptions, and even unfamiliarity with GMO food products. Many consumers report that they receive their information about GMO food products from the media, internet, and other news sources, which are not based on research, academics, or scholarly. These sources may be less reliable than scientific experts whom consumers trust more to present the facts. Although many in the United States support mandatory GMO labeling, consumer awareness of current GMO labeling is low. A distinction must also be made between GMO familiarity and scientific understanding, because those who are familiar with it tend to be more resistant to bioengineering, whereas those with higher scientific knowledge scores tend to have less negative attitudes towards GMOs. The clinical view is in support that there are no adverse health effects and that GMO food products are safe to consume. They are regulated through the FDA just as any other food source is. There's a decrease in food shortage when things are GMO modified, which increases the shelf life. Many are in support of labeling, though. They do feel that consumers do have the right to choose and should be full aware of what is going on with their food choices. The political viewpoint on GMO and GMO labeling is that they're in support of labeling and also in support of GMOs. There is a nationwide GMO labeling law. The United States passed its first nationwide GMO Labeling Act in 2016, which requires companies to disclose genetically engineered food. The bill is known as the S-764 114th Congress, 2015-2016, which was signed into effect by President Obama. This bill is to create a federal labeling standard for foods with genetically modified ingredients and block states from issuing their own laws sailed through the House. This bill, which was passed by a 306 to 117 vote, directs the U.S. Department of Agriculture to create a national labeling standard that allows food producers to choose how they want to disclose the presence of genetically modified ingredients. Under this legislation, manufacturers will be able to use text, symbols, or a QR code that consumers must scan with their smartphone to relay information. The primary component of this bill in relation to GMOs is that it requires food companies to disclose GMOs and genetically engineered foods. It does give them a little free range on how they choose to disclose that information, which is why they could do it in text, symbols, or the QR code. There's also a social view regarding genetically modified organisms, and that is all built around a level of trust. Consumers must feel a sense of trust when it comes to new innovative food technology, such as using GMOs. With any new technology, whether it be in agriculture, medicine, or anything of that nature, there needs to be a level of trust built. People are concerned when using a product for the first time or before it's been out for a while to know if there's any adverse health effects or harm it could produce. Research has shown that there is no harmful effects, but people are still concerned. There's a perception of risk associated with new and the unknown. There was a beer research study that supports this idea. The results of the study suggest that even when a product provides additional benefits, the technology that is used to produce functional food influences the acceptance of the product. Information about the manufacturing process may also influence how the taste of a product is evaluated. In the experimental study, it provided participants with information about the manufacturing process regarding traditional beer versus GMO beer. After receiving this information, participants tasted the beer and evaluated it. Results showed that the technology had a psychological effect on the perception of the product. Participants liked the taste of the beer labeled as traditional beer more than they liked the taste of the beer labeled as GMO. When the participants were unaware that there is a difference between GMO beer and traditional beer, the results were different. Many argue that they could not taste the difference between the two samples of beer, and some were even in support of the GMO labeled beer when they were unaware that it was genetically modified. This shows the perception associated with taste and a likableness. When those are unaware that there's a GMO product, they're more likely to think it tastes better and be more accepting of it. There is also a dichotomy of nature versus technology when it comes to food products. In advertisements, it is not a coincidence that food products are often associated with nature. Nature and naturalness are positively valued concepts. In line with this, results of several studies suggest that the dichotomy between nature and technology is important for a better understanding of the acceptance of innovative food technologies. People tend to have a confidence in natural food and the way it is produced, but they are suspicious of new food and new food technologies. Perceived naturalness seems to be a factor that influences acceptance of new food technology. The more a product is seen as natural, the less acceptable will be its genetic engineered version of that product. Assessments of the naturalness of food seems to be correlated with sensory appeal. Natural food is associated with better looking and better tasting food compared with food containing additives or artificial ingredients. This is why in many television ads and commercials, they associate their natural food products with forests, waterfalls, trees, and things of that nature, because it is proven that consumers have a positive view when food is associated with nature. There's also an ethical consideration when it comes to GMO food labeling. People have the right to know versus ignorance on the subject of GMOs and GE products can lead to the lack of acceptance of the technology. People also have a right to their own opinion that it tampers with nature. Many feel as though if you take a food source and take it into a lab or change its genetic structure, that it is no longer natural or safe to eat. Research disproves that it is not safe to eat and is in favor of GMOs and actually can increase its nutritional value. However, many of the public do not view it this way. The benefits do outweigh the risks. There is no discovered health risks that comes with GMO food sources. It can enhance the nutritious value of a food. GMO food sources can take a particular gene and enhance its nutritious value, mineral value, vitamin levels, and create a healthier food for consumers. It also lessens the price of food for purchasers, manufacturers, buyers, and consumers. It will increase the shelf life, which then decreases the food shortage. If an item can stay on the shelf longer, there's a greater chance it will be purchased, and therefore it will not expire or go to waste. It can also increase a pleasuring taste. They can manipulate the genes and modify it to produce a stronger taste that the human population conceives as good. The Right to Know campaign is in support of the labeling of GMO and GE foods. Consumers have a right to know how their food was produced and processed. This is a political cartoon that is showing that there are misconceptions about genetically modified organisms and how that they are actually good. The angry, scared-looking man on the left, who has a pot of biotech food, is yelling, "Do you know what this stuff can do to you?" The hungry-looking person on the right says, "Yes, help keep me alive." This political cartoon is in the support of genetically modified organisms. To summarize, genetically modified organisms and genetically engineered food products are a controversial issue since its discovery and mass production in the 1990s. Scientific research is in support of the technology due to it having no negative health risk and only positive benefits such as increased nutrition, longer shelf life, decreasing food shortages, decrease the need for pesticides, and lessen food prices. Many members of the general public are not as accepting. Consumers want natural or organic ingredients, not technologically altered food. A solution to this controversy would be to increase funding for health education and promotion on the subject of GMOs. Education is key for any change in a person's mindset, and especially a health behavior change. An increase of exposure of facts, research, and studies will increase the likelihood that people would be in support of GMO foods. Without the proper knowledge and facts regarding any issue, people are going to go with what they get from the media. Starting education at a younger age about the subject before preconceived biases and opinions can be formed to allow the individual to be exposed to both sides of the issue before forming an opinion. If children are educated about the subject of GMOs at a young age before they already have their opinions made, they will have the true understanding on both sides of the issues and have all the facts and be able to make an educated decision whether they are in support of GMO foods or not. Once a person has already had an opinion made up, it is very difficult to try and change it. Questions. 1. What is the difference between GE foods and GMO foods? 2. When was the method of genetically engineered foods introduced? 3. Which viewpoint listed in the lecture do you support and why? 4. Do you believe American people are adequately educated on the topic of GMOs to make informed decisions? References.